evening, everyone, and welcome to Tuckahoe's very first Historic Preservation Commission meeting of 2024. Happy New Year. Great to see everyone here. Hope you had wonderful holidays. We are off and running as the year gets off to what we trust will be an interesting and productive start. Let's hit the ground running, if we could, by officially calling to order tonight's meeting of January 3rd, 2024. It is a new year, but the same tradition of beginning each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. If we could all stand, please, and together recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Super, thank you very much. And we will do a roll call. I will start, and then if I could look to my left, I am Jenny Steinhagen.
Ladislao Castellanos.
Peggy Bellis.
Greg Luisi.
Samara Abrams.
Super, thank you. We are all here. The agenda as posted on the website is the one that we will follow tonight. We have the approval of minutes followed by the continuation of a public hearing, as well as what I believe falls under discussion here, and then miscellaneous business. The minutes, let's get them out of the way. Our last meeting was held in October on the 25th, and 3 of the 5 of us were at that meeting. And I trust that all of us have seen, read, and reviewed those minutes. For the 3 of us who were at that meeting, for the approval of the minutes, unless there are any questions or any discussion, can I ask for a motion to approve the minutes from October 25th?
So moved.
Second.
Super. And I would be the third there. So all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We have the approval of minutes from the quorum of our last meeting. Next, we have a public hearing, and this is to consider the Certificate of Hardship application for 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Ward House, and this is continued. Let me tee us up for the discussion, give a little bit of background where we are, how we got here, as well as the parameter of tonight's discussion. 230 White Plains Road is also known as the Ward House. It is a 1790 structure that was recommended for local landmarking status under Tuckahoe's historic preservation legislation with a unanimous vote of this board that was unanimously approved by the Tuckahoe Village Board of Trustees. It was deemed architecturally significant for many reasons, including the 1790s wood, the stone foundation, original, the marble steps outside of it. It was deemed historically significant for the many skirmishes and events associated with the American Revolution that took place right there at the top of Winter Hill Road, as well as the American patriots who lost their lives there. Tuckahoe marble was discovered there. Presidents have passed through. It played a huge role in the development of Tuckahoe's economic history, as well as played a big part in its social and cultural history. So as a Tuckahoe local landmark, it is afforded certain protections. And those protections are discussed. I always bring a copy of the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation Legislation. It says what exactly is protected in a Tuckahoe local landmark, of which Tuckahoe now has 2, and that is specifically regarding the exterior of the property. So 230 White Plains Road, there are certain restrictions to what can and cannot be done to it as a local landmark. It cannot be torn down. There are 2 exceptions for that. The first is if it can be demonstrated that a structure is in danger of falling down and causing immediate danger to the imminent neighborhood of its surroundings. There was an application put forward to this commission to determine whether or not that was the case, and it was determined that no, that certificate of appropriateness for demolition did not hold. That brought us to the Certificate of Hardship, and that is strictly on the financial situation about the Ward House. And a number of documents have been submitted to help us get to the answers of the questions that are in this legislation. One of those documents was received by the Commission this morning. So we would like to acknowledge receipt of some additional information and as well as some additional information received yesterday from other members of the community. And the discussion tonight, therefore, is not revisiting any of those previous discussions, but rather to raise questions, share information that is new, that will help us get to the answer that we need, which is a certificate of hardship justified by the criteria stated in the Tuckahoe Historic Preservation legislation? That's our path. That's our goal. That's our direction. So as an open public meeting, individuals are invited to speak. But again, I'll ask you if we could keep it within the parameters of the Certificate of Hardship discussion. And off the bat, we have representatives from 230 White Plains Road who we would like to invite if they choose to come up first. First, we should acknowledge that a number of members of this commission were allowed to go into 230 White Plains Road last month, and we appreciate that, and it informs some of the questions and hopefully answers that are part of tonight's discussion as well as our ongoing review. So I think we can invite anyone and everyone with the first opportunity to our applicant.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Lee Lefkowitz from Zarin and Steinmetz. I represent Biggest Fish Westchester LLC, the applicant on this application, and with me is Louis Campana, our architect. Greg Holcomb, the principal of the applicant, wanted to be here tonight. His flight was delayed today, so he couldn't make it today to come back. But we're here, like Madam Chair, you indicated, for the second time for this public hearing. A lot was gone over at the last public hearing, so I don't want to use up too much oxygen now retreading that. I want to be able to answer any questions your board may have. I'll hit a couple of points and then I'll turn the microphone back over to you all. Last time we walked through each of the hardship criteria. I'm not going to walk through them again. Your board left it open because a couple of members weren't there to give them a chance to get involved, so we're happy to answer those questions. We also thank the board for taking the time to conduct site visits last month. On the hardship criteria, we submitted a follow-up submission yesterday that we think hits a lot of the points that were raised during the last hearing. We hope that your board, if it hasn't already had a chance to review it, will review that before making the final determination, because we think we've hit a lot of those answers. But I just wanted to hit one in particular, which is a big part of the conversation we had last time was, what is the hardship? What's the monetary difference between renovating this property versus rebuilding it? And we think that that's what we've done, at least it's what we focused on in our submission to illuminate that for you. We've provided you a couple of pieces of new information that help quantify this. So first, we went ahead and we took each structural issue that we know about. So this doesn't even include ones we don't know about yet, which we would learn about upon opening up the building. We've taken each one that we've learned about, and we've categorized it, turned it into a punch list, and then costed them out. That was attached to an affidavit from our architect, Louis Campana, who's here tonight, who can answer some questions about that if you have them. But we took each one piece by piece and costed those out, which totals to $936,955 to repair the interior structural issues that we've identified so far. That supplements the quote we gave you last time for exterior renovations we proposed to do to the house. That was $1,076,455. Those two can then be added to, if we were to redo the interior structural components. An estimate we provided last time from Mr. Campana indicated that the cost to refinish the interior after correcting those components is $311,000. So the total renovation cost, if we were to renovate rather than rebuild, you add those together, you get $2,324,410. That's the number your board can line up with what we've also provided a quote for, the demolition and rebuild cost of $882,755. So the delta we're talking about, the hardship we're talking about here, is $1,441,634. That's the difference between what we've costed out to repair versus to replace. So we hope that armed with those numbers, your board and the public can see this is not really a quibble over a minor amount or a couple of bucks more that it might cost to renovate this house. There's a meaningful difference here. And as I said in my letter, there's a reality that we all must grapple with here. This house was demolished a long time ago. It was de facto demolished by Concordia College when it permitted it to fall into this serious state of disrepair. I'd ask your board and the public to accept this moment as an opportunity. This property can be saved, and the historic nature of this property can be saved. You have an applicant here who wants to work with you, including by advancing a rebuild proposal that effectively replicates what's there with a new resilient structure up to code and marketable. Someone who cares about this community and seeing this property succeed and its history honored. It's extremely common throughout the state where properties are designated as landmarked or restricted that they are rebuilt as needed. Indeed, this house was rebuilt after it was burnt in a fire in the late 18th century. What Concordia did to it by turning it into a dorm is no different than what that fire did to it in the late 18th century. And it was rebuilt then, and it can be rebuilt now. So I'll close with this. Your board's job is to balance all the factors we've discussed here, all the elements in your code. Not analyze whether each element has been met to the maximum. So there were issues raised last time. Well, you may have listed it, but you didn't put it on Zillow. Or how serious were you about seeking out the incentive programs? We've identified each and every issue, and we've answered each and every issue. And what your board is tasked with doing now is a balancing test, to balance each factor in the code and say, on balance, have we met them or not? Have we met your standard or not? Section 11A7C of the code says that in reviewing an application, your board should, quote, be guided by the factors. So we believe we've laid out the case that these factors and the showing we've made should guide your board to grant this application and permit the applicant to save this property by rebuilding it. So I'd ask at the close of this, of tonight, that your board close a public hearing, and we'd ask for a vote on our application. But at this time, we're happy to answer any questions your board may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess, if I may, I guess my question, on the renovation side of the cost, that's $2.4 million, right?
Yes.
Is what you're saying. Now, forgive me, I'm a layman in this world of, so tearing it down and building a new structure would be $882,000.
Right.
So I guess my question is, what's the material difference, the actual materials that are you using that make the cost less than $1 million for a brand new house versus what materials you will be using? Or, I mean, I mean, and I know that there's a lot more than just, you know, repairing and replacing the interior.
Good evening. Happy New Year. Louis Campana, architect for the applicant. So at the last meeting, we presented two quotes, one of which was for restoration of the dwelling, using materials in kind to those that would have been used when the house was rebuilt in the 1790s. The quote for reconstruction is where, for instance, we'd be using new lumber, right? New lumber, we'd be using vinyl siding, we'd be using asphalt roofing, we would be using Anderson 200 series windows. So that was the point of departure. So when I put together the numbers in a spreadsheet, which I use to guide the design process for new construction, what it tells me is that based on the cost of the house being rebuilt at 882, plus all of the soft costs, which are professional fees, engineering, architecture, permitting fees, that comes out to about $200 a square foot, which is a new, well-built house, but not using spectacular materials.
So the $2 million plus is
That's not, so the reason for that disparity is because, number one, demolition, right, of the existing dwelling would be in the realm of between about $25,000 to $30,000. That is done very quickly and moved away from the site very quickly. When you're dealing with restoration or a preservation project, it's more of a surgical endeavor. Where you're going in and everything is piecemeal. It's not done all at the same time. It can't be, because then you can really impact the existing structural integrity of the dwelling.
so that
It's
is,
the labor.
so that's where the cost is going, is to bring it up to code, to restore the structural integrity of the building before then you finish the inside and the outside.
Right, and in doing that, like you just mentioned, those items, the exterior,
Mm-hmm.
are interior,
Okay.
are going to be compromised in order to rectify the structural conditions.
Yeah, that was one of the things that, when I did the inspection tour of the building, one of the things that I noticed right away was every room was sloping. So I'm presuming that you obviously would have to start from scratch and rebuild the floors up, and I don't know, what would be happening up in the roof area. So I guess you've answered my question, is restore the integrity of the building is a big chunk of that $2 million. Okay, thank you.
I appreciate the question, and I appreciate the discussion. I think this ties into a related question that we had at the last meeting, which was a lot of time and effort went into providing quite a few large numbers. But we were curious as to the breakdown of those numbers, because as a homeowner myself, I know when I get a number of different quotes, I get the range of estimates of in products. And I think that the question, I think maybe I asked it at the last meeting, and I think I focused way too much on doors. But to pick on a particular part of the house, we know that the house has been stabilized, as verified by a historic preservation architect, and is confirmed by the team here. Of course, some work is going to go into the foundation and the structural integrity of the home. But when we look at all of the pieces that come together to form these large numbers, I think my question was, what range are we talking about here? When the historic preservation legislation requires that a qualified real estate agent provide a listing, which we'll get into later, but also some comps in the area too. So we're talking about square footage and how much you're going to put into this house, and as to how much you're going to get out of that house, and what was the balance? What was the balance there? I think so. The document we received this morning was very large, and I didn't get into all of the details. I don't know if that breakdown is in there, but when I hear, it's going to cost $2.4 million, my brain has a hard time of just accepting that off the bat because of some certain materials that were in kind, because I know there's a range of materials. I'm not saying build a shabby renovation here, but I just, my mind, when I hear these numbers, I think seeks substantiation or something to help us see that range. And is that it? Is that the only choice? It's 2.4, or it has to come down, or it's 2.4 or somebody goes bankrupt. It's a big question, and I think an answer that gets broken down piece by piece. So are we still working on that piece by piece?
Well, what we've done was, since the last go around, we also provided a second restoration quote, which would be utilizing materials that would be basically consistent with the area, with the immediate neighborhood. And what that was able to do is it took the number down probably about 10%. Some of the materials that I'm referring to are going from wood cedar shingle roof to a high-end, I think it's manner, asphalt shingle, going to a hardy board siding as opposed to cedar. Windows would be Marvin Elevate as opposed to Marvin Signature. So we basically took the materials and stepped lower in terms of cost. Right? So keeping in mind, the detailing will remain the same, but the material is just a bit different. So then we had 2 restoration proposals. We have the preservation proposal, and then we have the reconstruction proposal.
Okay, I think we're heading in the same direction. I know, again, as a homeowner, if I'm not going to put $2 million into my house if I'm only going to sell it for $1 million. I also don't know if I were to put my house on the market, I would gut it and replace it with whether it was the highest or the next value of it. So I think we asked this question at the last meeting too, was where this impetus came from of, gutting and just, schnazzing up this building so that it gets all this money put into it and then all this money coming out of it that probably isn't comparable to the other properties in the area. So I think we're asking some important questions here. It does come down to money, right?
Yeah, I think from recently, within the last 2 years, I believe, home on Crawford Drive sold a early 1900s home, not updated. I believe sold for just at or over $1 million, about a block and a half away. We have 2 homes going up across the street, probably in the realm of 1.5, 1.6. But not at the same size as the one at 230 West. So the profit margin, I believe, mentioned in your letter that it will be tight, but it's one way of making the house sellable.
Okay, I have one quick question, and then Lee, you're absolutely welcome to come up. So let's pause for a second here about what we mean when we say hardship. Because if we're looking at the difference between this amount to tear down and rebuild and this amount to schnazz it up and sell it, is the hardship the difference in cost there? Or is the hardship what was paid for the house and what is gotten and what is received in return? Because let's say that there was a purchase price of $651 for a property, and I haven't seen any documentation from an appraiser of what the actual value of the home is. But if the home is valued at a certain number, and yet we're putting all of this additional money into it, and you get a bunch of that back in the sale, haven't you made money? Is a way that you can look at it too, because is hardship, cutting your losses, or is hardship you could have made a certain amount of money had it not been landmarked, is a question that comes to mind.
I'll answer this, but if you want to add to it. So the difference and the hardship lies in the demolition in the project. If anyone hears in the industry, architecture, or Mr. Castellanos, you're an architect, right? So the hand demolition of the house, as opposed to just removing it quickly, we're talking about a difference. I believe it's what I said before, $25,000 to $30,000, as opposed to, I think it was 230. About a $200,000 difference just in demolition cost. And that's not refinishing. So I think that is where the demolition, the shoring, that's where we're seeing the biggest disparity through this exercise. In creating the financial hardship of preserving or restoration.
I just have one question. So we received that document, and I thought I was going to get through it. There was no way. We did ask about the breakdown. Are those new numbers? That's what we're talking about in the appendix of the document? Okay. So again, we were not able to go through the document and look at those numbers, but
Yes, that's all in there, so you'll
Okay.
see that when you get a chance. You'll see each itemized cost item and what it costs and why. I want to just, so talking about the hardship, I want to zone in on what does this law do and what is this about, and this also plays into what materials are we using and why. First of all, let me be clear about what Louis said. We answered, Madam Chair, your question regarding what if we used we were talking about Home Depot doors, if you remember last time. With that's what Mr. Campana was referencing. He provided a second quote, which we attached, which you now have, which shows what if we use cheaper materials. As he indicated, it brought the price down, I think, about $90,000. Because to answer your question, Mr. Luisi, it's really the labor cost, and as Mr. Campana indicated, it's really the surgical demolition we'd have to do the renovation. That's really where you're seeing the big difference between what's it going to cost to renovate versus rebuild. It's the labor. It's how long is it going to take us to demolish and repair each of these surgical items, as opposed to a demolition, which can be done very quickly, and a rebuild from scratch, which can be done much quicker. And that brings me to your Madam Chair, your questions about the hardship. What we need to, I want to be straight about what this law does. We have a property owner here whose property has been landmarked. That doesn't mean, though, that the municipality has complete control over exactly what and when he can do with every aspect, even of the exterior of this property. We're here because we've made an application pursuant to the law and what it allows for the landowner to alter the property. Now, that can be done through a traditional certificate of appropriateness, where I say, hey, I want to put up new gutters. Is that all right? And your board says yes or no. Or it can be say, well, I want to demolish the property. And then there are certain criteria that say, well, you have to show us a couple of things, and we'll balance it, and we'll say we should let you demolish it and rebuild it or not. So this isn't really about like, well, what if he could make a little bit of some money off of what he bought it for? Doesn't that negate the hardship? Or that's, I want to get us looking at the forest rather than the trees here. The forest is, we're a property owner who has property rights, and we've made an application to alter the property. The same way that we'd make an application if we want to put on new gutters, but in this particular case, it's to rebuild the structure that's there with a property that replicates it. And by the way, under the law, we're required to upkeep the property now, right? Your board is homed in on that. So on the one hand, the law says, well, you've got to make sure that this building is kept safe and up to date. So we've got a lot of work we need to do that. You were all in the building. It's not safe right now. So the law requires us to fix that. And yeah, it's a hardship if this board and this municipality were to require this property owner to do so in a way that costs him $2.4 million when he could do so in a way that costs him $882,000 and put up a property that essentially replicates what's there, and which, by the way, your board and the municipality can offer thoughts as to what your board wants it to look like when it's rebuilt. So that's what we're here to try to accomplish, is to get to that place where, as with many properties throughout New York State, which are landmarked and which are historic, which fall into disrepair, we rebuild the property and we honor that history. Whether that's by a plaque saying, here stands the Ward House, which was rebuilt after a fire in the late 19th century, and which, after being used as a dorm by Concordia College for many years, had to be rebuilt again in 2024. We're happy to do those things. And that's what landmarking is about, and that's what historic preservation is about. But historic preservation isn't accomplished by overburdening a landowner and effectively freezing in time a property and debilitating him through financial hardship and preventing him from doing the restoration he wants to do, which is by rebuilding it. So more questions, but I just wanted to hit that once that was coming up with Mr. Campana. We're happy to answer more questions.
Okay, just to be clear, historic preservation, I would argue, is the exact opposite of tearing something down and rebuilding something new and saying that it was a rebuild. The rebuild, according to the historians back in the years where there were still eyewitnesses to the American Revolution, documented that it was the same footprint using some of the same materials. Now we've got a 1790 structure that fades into distant memory if we put a plaque. So I would, with all due respect, argue that we are talking about two different things when we're talking about rebuild. As far as we're concerned, a rebuild is making sure that foundation is stabilized, which we were told it was. A rebuild is taking the existing materials and not gutting them and throwing them out, but using them to make this a place that is remains a living structure within our community as it has for this many years. Not to wax poetic on that, but I think with the hardship numbers, I'm bringing up this difference between what you could have made and what you might make versus maybe a return on investment. If that was to be accepted as a direction for the legislation, which I think could certainly be interpreted, that would involve putting it on the market. And do we get into this discussion now, or about the listing, or do we can? For the listing, yeah. So I believe there were many questions at the last meeting about the listing for the property, and I believe we were, in the documentation submitted today, led to believe that there's a bona fide reason for the listing of the ward house in a special place that is accessed by special people. And by that I mean none of us can find it because none of us have this secret code into this MLS universe where it currently exists. I know there was rationale provided, and I'm using these terms because I don't know if I understand what's going on. I think it's because they don't want to put it on Zillow so that a cajillion people want to tour the house, or they don't want to put it on Zillow because there's a suggestion that if someone saw a house listed for $650, that they might want to come and see, historic preservation people. Or I don't know. I'm led to believe that, which is why I'm using these terms, because I don't know if I completely understand the rationale for saying we tried to sell it by hiding it in this location that a few people saw. They really did, but the not everybody got to see. So is that a fair question?
I think it's a fair question. Candidly, I don't think it's framed all that fair, but I'll answer it. And I don't agree with some of the rhetoric that was just used to answer the question. But look, I'll start with this. Your law states as one of the elements of the certificate of appropriateness application for a hardship that we show efforts to find a buyer, along with, quote, any listing. So jumping back to the outset, the law doesn't require that we list it. The law says if we've listed it, any listing we've made, we should give to you, which we've done. We've listed it, it's on MLS. We've also provided an affidavit from the applicant himself, as well as his broker, detailing that the listing is out there, explaining that it's been, I believe, Madam Chair, you said a few people, it's been viewed by actually 1,814 agents as of the time that that was, I think, a month ago or more, that the broker signed that affidavit. And it was suggested, well, why isn't it on Zillow? Why isn't it on these other websites? And we have our affidavit from the applicant as well as the broker himself offering the reason why. They didn't need to list it in the first place. I'll say that one more time. But again, this has been a contentious process. There's a community opposition group who's come out against this. And the applicant felt that to list it on a site like Zillow, to make it so advertised and publicly available, could draw in non-bona fide folks to come in and look at it, or even folks who may be bona fide or claim to be bona fide at the time, and put in an offer, get into a contract that's contingent in some way, and then drag it out, and then after an inspection say I'm walking away, and then you're right back at square one. And as the attorney for the applicant, I would never recommend that in the situation, particularly because if offers are being made and they're not bona fide, I could imagine coming before this board and being asked, well, how many offers have you received? How many, how many folks have put, how many contracts have you? Well, we're in contract now. Okay, so let's see what happens. Then the next month they pull out. So we didn't want, and the applicant didn't want to be in this position where untrue folks come in and try to make offers to potentially cast a cloud of doubt here before your board that maybe there are these people out here. Maybe we should keep adjourning this, and maybe we should see if there's real interest in the property. 1,814 agents saw it. The applicant wished to limit it to agents so that it was legitimate folks looking at this who actually have a reason to come in here. And not only that, the property's in bad shape, guys. You've all seen that. So this is not someone who wants their property sitting out there so that a family can come in and think this is maybe a renovation project for them. This is much more than a renovation project for a family who might be looking for a property on Zillow. This is something that requires a real developer to come in and really redevelop this project. And anyone who wants to learn about it can find out through their agent on the MLS listing about the property. Efforts have been made. The code only requires us to tell you what our efforts are. We have shown you that. We've given you the offer that we received, and we've detailed in 2 affidavits what those efforts are listed. And what I've asked, what I will ask, is the same as I asked at the opening, which is this is about a balancing test. This isn't, well, this factor requires you to demonstrate your efforts, and it mentions a listing, and it wasn't quite, no, this isn't about every factor needs to be satisfied to perfection to satisfy the certificate of appropriateness criteria. It's, did we do enough on balance to satisfy these criteria? We've made efforts, we've negotiated even with the one offer that we received, we listed it on MLS, and we submit that that's sufficient to satisfy this criteria.
Well,
Sorry. So just talking about the efforts, because the law does require, as you just said, right, demonstrated efforts. And forgive me because I haven't made it through your very lengthy submission, which I appreciate, and I am looking forward to reading it. But just while we're here, could you talk a little bit more? Are there other efforts that you had demonstrated, or are you arguing that the just putting it on MLS and then negotiating with the bona fide offer you received or submission are sufficient?
So I'll detail that a little bit more. So as I said, it's been viewed by many agents. I think one individual came to look at the property and then there was no interest in it. I think as of, I don't know the most up to date, but Greg would know. As of recently, that was the only, other than the community group, which came with an offer, which we provided to you. Since then, there have been other efforts. We have been in talks with, although no formal offer has been made, a potential buyer. But again, because no formal offer has been made, there's nothing to submit. But we've been sort of in behind the scenes, sort of informal talks that maybe there could be some interest with an additional buyer. And we've in good faith tried to work through that. But there's nothing concrete so that's why you don't have anything in writing.
Yeah, thank you.
well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that there is an openness to a potential sale with it if the right offer is made. And thank you for shedding light on a certain perspective. I guess my mind comes back to we have a scenario, a requirement, and a needed solution. And I think you were kind of headed in that direction too. Like what else could be done if the goal was to cut a loss and sell it for a certain amount, which I think we're getting closer to. We're getting closer to.
Well, again, I mean, we're a property owner. We don't have to sell our property. The law can't make us sell our property. The law requires us to show you any efforts that we made to sell it. I think, and pursuant to the New York model landmarking law, seems to indicate that the reason for this is to sort of give an indication of what the market can bear for the property, so that your board can have an idea of what, of whether we could establish a reasonable return for it, right? So we've provided you the materials to satisfy the element. It is the landowner's intention to rebuild the dwelling on the site, not to sell the property. But openness is the right word. Of course, he's open to stuff, and that's why it's been listed. Any other questions?
I wish I was able to read the whole document. I think some of the questions that I have are in there as well, and the language of the listing. You know, that again, that the listing that is that was available to select realtors, that's in there as well. Okay, so that's what I would like to review and look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So since the property was landmarked, what effort has been made to address any condition on the engineering report?
So let me answer that this way. Respectfully, this board is not an enforcement body. I'm aware that there's provisions in the landmarking law which require the owner of a landmarked property to upkeep it. That's for the building department to enforce. That being said, as I think the chair indicated, the building has been stabilized as a result of that. And there was a finding by this board that there's no imminent threat. So many of the issues structurally with the interior could not be undertaken at this time, because to do so would compromise the exterior, which we're not allowed to alter without a certificate of appropriateness application. So that's what this application is all about. We are trying to remedy those conditions, and to begin remedying them would start us down the road of the $2.4 million that we're trying to avoid by doing the $882,000 way.
Which I think brings us back to the question of how does Biggest Fish potentially recoup the money that went into it versus an opportunity cost that is not in our purview. I think that saying we would have made this much if we had only had this and did that, I don't think we are authorized to help answer. I think our job is to determine what is hardship, and I don't think opportunity cost is hardship. I think hardship needs to be qualified and quantified here, which we're working very hard on doing. But I start there.
I actually don't think that that's what this is about. So this is the question is, look at the elements in the code. Did we do enough on each of those to satisfy, on balance, to get a certificate of appropriateness to rebuild the property? That's really what it's about. It's not about, well, what is hardship? The code tells you exactly what the criteria are, and the question is, did we do enough of that, I think. In terms of opportunity cost and those other items, I mean, look, if you want to try to quantify what hardship is, as Mr. Castellanos, you indicated, the code requires us to keep this property up to date. So the question is, we've got to do it, right? We've got to fix the building. So we've provided bona fide quotes from real builders, architects, and engineers showing what the cost would be if we were to renovate it to get there, that we're required to do, to do this, to fix this building, versus to rebuild it. So the hardship is one way costs us $1.4 million more. That's the hardship.
I took a look at the previous breakdown, not the one you sent this morning. One question I had was when you're restoring something, you're not replacing, right? So this breakdown was about, in my mind, about replacing. The numbers you had, 100,000, 80,000, roof, windows, doors. Is that what we're doing? When you preserve something, you try to keep it, right? I'm not going to remove a door and put another door to replace it and charge you 100,000 for the door, right? So that's what I got from the breakdown. It wasn't, and there was stuff in there that didn't really affect the property, right? Waterproofing. There was backfill, all these numbers that is not part of the building, right? The exterior, meaning the landmark and what we're looking at, right? So when I looked at the breakdown, it wasn't so much as preserving it; it was more like just replacing, right? you have a roof, I'm gonna replace it with this, and it's gonna cost so much. And it didn't itemize the breakdown. It just gave you a number.
So just what, before I answer the question, just one thing. It's been said a couple of times that we submitted this morning. We submitted yesterday, so which doesn't make much of a difference, but I just wanted that to be clear for the record so that the date of the
I
submission
got
is
it this
correct.
morning.
To answer that question, that part of that I think I addressed in my letter. In preserving the property, if we were to renovate it, it's simply a fact that to do so, a lot of replacement is going to have to be done. A lot of the wood is rotted. A lot of the interior structural components have problems. There's no insulation in any of the walls. Effectively, all the walls will have to come out and insulation will have to be put in, right? So, and that's just what we've seen so far. So, and that's just not because we want to, that's code required at this point, many of those things. So to answer your question, Mr. Castellanos, I think it's the interior structural components go hand in hand with the exterior because it's only the exterior that's been landmarked, but for us to get this building to a safe place, we've got to do the interior also. And if we're going to do the interior, the exterior is going to be affected because, as you said, Mr. Luisi, once we take out the floor of the bottom level, the top level is going to be affected. What's that going to do to the roof? So it's because everything is intertwined here. It's not as though you could sort of look at the exterior and say, well, why are you replacing that element but not this element, and why aren't you preserving? It's really a function of once we get in there, if we were to do it the more expensive way, we're opening up a can of worms, and it's many of the components in there would have to be replaced, even if some could be preserved.
Well, I agree that some components do need to get replaced, but do you need to rip up the floor and replace the floor, or do you want to keep the floor?
If by the floor you mean the wood, again, so I take your point, Mr. Castellanos. Again,
right.
I think the big, as we said a few times, the big discrepancy here is in that labor cost, right? It's not really in the material cost of, well, if we're going to replace the floor or not. And by the way, the floor isn't even what's landmarked, so in theory we could just replace the floor if we wanted to. So again, we're winding down a path here, which I totally appreciate, but I want to get us focused back on really the point here, which is if we were to undertake this, which is what the hardship application is about and what we really focused our submission on, what's it going to cost to do it one way or the other? And these are the bona fide estimates that we have for each way.
I think these are all good questions, and I think this is a big one that maybe we didn't focus on as much at the last meeting, and have the opportunity to just let swirl around in our minds that exactly historic preservation is not a gut and redo; it's a salvage and reuse. Those are fun words to say, but there's a lot of work involved with that too. But I think it's a good question.
Well, I understand, Madam Chair. I mean, look, I would just really encourage your board to look at what the code says and what it allows. And again, if we talk about, well, what does historic preservation mean to all of us? That's really a different thing than what does the code allow. So yes, in theory, historic preservation means that roof should be preserved. But that's actually not what the code says. What the code says is if I own this property, I'm the property owner, I'm allowed to change the roof and put on a different roof if I want to. I just got to go and get a permission and satisfy a few criteria in the code, and then I get to replace my roof. It remains the ward house, it just has a new roof. Many times over the years, aspects of the ward house changed. And even after landmarking, a property owner cannot be unduly restricted from changing aspects of the house. They don't remain frozen in time. They're not required to reuse every piece of the house that can be reused. So I totally appreciate looking at this through the lens of what is historic preservation, but I would just say really focus on the code. A property owner is allowed to change his property. Even a landmarked property owner is allowed to change his property. We are asking for a bigger change. I get that. And that's why we are so focused on what the rebuild would look like, which is to replicate this as best as possible.
Okay, I mean, the code exists to protect landmarked properties, which absolutely cannot be torn down. They can't be demolished. Unless there are two extenuating circumstances. The first is if it's going to cause danger. We already went down that route. And the other is if it's going to cause hardship. And what does that mean? Is it going to bankrupt the owner? Is it are they never I think we're getting into the understanding finally of what I think hardship really means. But that's what we're tasked with here. Our obligation is to set it's landmarked. Sorry, the answer is no, you can't tear it down. But wait, if it's falling down, you can. But wait, if there's extenuating hardship, financial situation, then we need to look at what that is and have every effort been exhausted to find an alternate to this terrible situation that could, I don't know, bankrupt somebody, or not that they wanted to do something that they can't, unfortunately, because it's landmarked. That's not up to us. That ship sailed.
And I'm just going to quibble with that last point, because that's not what the code says. What the code says is there are, as your Madam Chair, you indicated, there are two scenarios when you can tear it down. First one, again, we're not here on the first one. We're here on the second one. And it's not, is it going to bankrupt the owner? And it's not, did you make every conceivable effort? That's not, it's, here are the criteria. They're right here. We make a showing, and your board balances them and decides, should we let this happen or not? That's what we're asking you to do. The word bankrupt isn't in there. The word every effort isn't in there. There's a series of criteria. We tried to hit each one as best we can. We asked that your board take a look at what we submitted and decide if we did enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We do acknowledge, Lee, that perhaps you submitted that to the village yesterday. The members of this commission received it this morning, and some of the information in there is new. I think some of it answers the questions that came up tonight. I don't know if all of it does, but this conversation tonight can continue if anyone would like to join the conversation, but I would ask that it remain focused on not rehashing things of the past, but the parameters of the discussion, as well as any new information that is helpful to this board in making a decision.
Okay, Sal Provenzano, 11 River Street, president of Friends of the Ward House. I have to say that Attorney Lefkowitz and I are in complete agreement. I didn't think I would ever be able to say that, but we are in complete agreement with one of his statements. And that is that whatever happens has to comply to the code of the law. So I took another look at the law, and this is specifically the economic hardship section, section 9. There's 8 points of compliance. So I'm going to pose a question to the commission. Which of those 8 points do you think are frivolous?
Dramatic pause, assuming that's rhetorical.
Well, my point is that if a law has 8 points, and each of these 8 points have to be complied with, and the applicant does not comply with those points, it's an open and shut case. There's no economic hardship, in my estimation. We had 2 months to get this thing done. Now, one of the things that you were given yesterday also, a much shorter letter, and this is from our attorney, Gary Rappaport. And I think that he succinctly summarized really the activity of the last meeting. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there are certain points here that I think are worth mentioning for the public. First of all, a review of New York State's case law reveals that hardship applications have been rare. In New York City, few have been granted in the nearly 60 years after the passage of its landmark law. This is likely due to the strict criteria that must be met for a hardship application to be approved. The Friends of the Ward House believe hardship exemptions for landmark properties should only be granted under exceptional circumstances and only if the applicants comply with the stringent requirements outlined in Tuckahoe's historic preservation law. That high standard has yet to be met, in our opinion. Secondly, and I'm drawing this, not a rehash, this was Mr. Holcomb's own testimony during the last meeting. He said himself, when Mayor Luisi had asked him whether or not, why he couldn't believe that somebody would buy something and not look at it. And Mr. Holcomb said, look, I was given a all-in-one deal from Concordia College. You buy everything or you get nothing. And there was a moratorium in place at that point. It wasn't a yellow light, it was a moratorium. And Mr. Holcomb, a very savvy business person, determined that the whole outweighed just the Ward House property. So he bought the whole thing. So, again, this is from our attorney's letter. Crucially, Mr. Holcomb admitted to buying the property knowing a moratorium was in place. This admission is devastating, as in most cases, buildings are landmarked after being purchased. So he went in, he knew what it was. You can interpret it as a yellow light. It's really up to the commission to determine whether it's a red light or a yellow light, okay? The law has these sections. Now, the hardship claim for a building purchase with actual or pending historic restrictions already in place raises another legal issue. If there's restrictions in place prior to the purchase, then the reality is that the hardship was evaluated when the property was purchased. And it was determined that on the whole, even though the letter of the law says we can't slice and dice the properties, but this is the reality of the situation that Mr. Holcomb even admitted. He bought it as a package. Now, it was stated that the property across the street has two houses there that are probably going to fetch between 1.5 and 1.2 million each. Mr. Holcomb has the same $651,000 value on that house across the street. Now, if he does realize that, then he's going to be making over $2.5 million on a property that was assigned a $651,000 basis point, which is really just a made-up number anyway. So that seems like a windfall. Again, the board, this is a fact. This is a point of fact. Hardship exemption should only be considered if an applicant has exhausted all reasonable alternatives. Now, I'm a salesperson, and when I try to sell things, I want to get as many buyers that could buy something in front of them. And I've been taken for a ride. I still get taken for a ride from some people that waste my time and they don't buy. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to show people things. It's beyond comprehension to me that the property still, as of today, cannot be found. I mean, it's not realtors that buy houses, it's people that buy houses. And all the houses that we have purchased, we've found, and we asked the realtor to bring us in to show us. So it defies logic that this part of the law is being followed if there is a restriction on who could see the house and who even knows that it's for sale. So again, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm just going to read the last paragraph in conclusion. In conclusion, the Friends of the Ward House reiterate that the hardship application is premature and incomplete under the existing guidelines governing Tuckahoe's hardship applications. Possibly, I mean, on behalf of the Friends of the Ward House, we feel that there is no hardship here, okay? And it's not just based on that we're a fringe group and we're trying to stand in the way of free enterprise and all that other stuff. The bottom line is that this is a historic property that has been on the Tuckahoe historic list for many, many years before the landmark law was passed. The Ward House has always been looked upon as a historic treasure within the village of Tuckahoe. And the reality is that I'm still hoping for a way for the developer and for the village and for us to come up with a way that this house cannot be torn down, that could be used for the benefit of generations to come. And, with 2024, here, it's a new year. Let's just hope that this new year continues in a very positive way. And the Ward House is part of that positive part of 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob Foyce, 105 Garth Road. There's a lot of work here. And you made a very interesting point, the salvage and reuse. I helped out a number of neighbors upstate a number of years ago when I was younger, repair an older house upstate. And I'm just curious, have any of you ever lifted a house?
Oh, sorry, but yeah, we have to bring the questions.
Well, the
up here.
reason I'm pointing this out is that old houses are really amazing. I watched it. You put the right footings in, you lift the house out, you can, newer homes, unfortunately, you try to do some of this stuff, and it's a nightmare, especially the prefabs. But it's pretty amazing what you can do with an older house as far as straightening it out and fixing it. And you're right, you're talking about a lot of resourceful things that have to be done. First thing thought that comes to mind is that the conversation should be about, he has a house here that it has an historical nature that by its nature is not going to be a profit venture. The rationale is profit, profit, profit. I'm sorry, I don't see that. But it's self-sustaining, yes. And here we are as a group trying to come up with ways to say, hey, what can we do to help out? This is a town and a village of a lot of craftsmen, a lot of creative people. There's a lot of fixes and a lot of things that can be done here. That's the first thing everybody's got to look at constructively. And the developer should look at it that way. He keeps looking at ways, and we're even in our thinking and our talking saying, okay, what can we do with it internally? What can he do where it's still self-sustaining? What kind of uses can it still have? So this is not just, let's just abandon it and leave him with a piece of property he has to hold up like a shell. Nobody's talking about that. We know there's got to be something functional to this. But that conversation should be had with us. Untrue folks, I don't know what to say to that. That's almost a T-shirt. Untrue folks, yeah, we should take a look at what the listing is. And having been a realtor, I believe there are other listings that are listed in MLS that are not necessarily profit ventures. Is it listed as such? Is it listed in MLS as a historical property? That's a question that has to be asked. Has he legally put it in as such? Has he presented it as such? Was there an inspection report or an as-is report before he purchased this? Or as Sal Provenzano pointed out, did he know what the odds were? Developers do this. They figure this out. They know their margins. He knows what he's going to make on the other properties. He knew what amount of money he can make. So he knew what the loss might be. Then there's the question of the side property and what kind of game he's going to play with that, if he plays a game, or if that's going to be cooperatively part of the whole package. I could see that coming too. That's a discussion for another day. You may not be an enforcement body, but if there are issues in that house that have to be addressed now, I hope that they're addressed. I hope the building department, I'm sure, has gone in there and said, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that, at least something. Cut the vines off the side of the building, check if there's any leaks. Yes, you hope that should be enforced. If you own a home and if you allow it to fall apart, you have some authority knocking on your door saying, hey, you can't let your house fall apart. So, it's just, I would love to take a look at the report. A lot of us would like to get a look-see just to find out what is going on here. What are the values of historical properties? Did his proposal do a comparison of what other historical properties have done as a financial comparison? especially if he's dealing with realtors. I'm sure they could have come up with some numbers. Surgical demolition? Does that mean that to cure the patient, you want to cut the legs off and cut the arms off, and we're going to be like a Monty Python? No. No, it's not supposed to be a surgical demolition. You're trying to preserve something. I'm just looking for my notes here. Overburdening. Define the burden. I hope that's in their paperwork defined. And what is the burden? Let's be fair. If there has to be some matter of self-sustaining stuff going on here, that has to be addressed. We do want to get to the table with the developer and have that discussion to help, to be a partner, to be a good neighbor. That's part of what is going on here, I hope. Show efforts to find a buyer as a historical property. Listen, there's been some very good faith efforts made to put that forth, and so far that has not happened. And I'm sure there are other people that in good faith hopefully do want to also step forward too. So I hope that conversation is really happening, because there is an opportunity here. But if he is going to be the owner, yes, we hope to work with him. But if someone else wants to step forward and work, we know that comes with a lot of responsibility, and that's important to understand. This is not pie in the sky. There's a lot of responsibility. But as you've pointed out twice now at 2 different meetings, it's not like everything has to be done this year or right away. There are certain things you want to make sure it's airtight, you want to make sure it's safe, and then gradually over time, the repairs can happen. He wants it to be an immediate house that can be sold. He doesn't want to keep it as an historical property. I think that's part of the confusion here. And I think that's a very unfortunate confusion here. And I don't know how you delineate that. I wish you luck, but I think that's part of what's being debated here legally. But also, he did buy this in good faith, knowing that he knew what he was buying. Or he can say he didn't know, but I think he did know. And again, we do want to work with him. What the market can bear. Well, again, we're talking about the market. He's talking about profit. That's not what you're talking about when you buy a historical property. I think that's the first, again, that's an overriding confusion here. And then one breath you're saying it's not an enforcement body. Another breath, we have a lot of costs here to repair it. And then he's saying it's not an imminent threat. Well, what is it? Is there a serious issue there that has to be addressed now? And there might be. Or is there not? Or he just wants to knock it down and just build something else there. Yes, there are some things on the outside that may want to be restored better than it was before. Good points. He's brought that up. I think but again, you have a village and a town with a lot of craftsmen, a lot of people who are interested in the historical value of this property and helping out. He could find out how he could solicit the resources and the volunteers to work on this property and help him out. So no one here is saying, well, you have it, you have to take care of it. No, we want to work with Mr. Holcomb. We want to work to preserve this property, and we want to be realistic about it. And the suggestions of how it could be used as another use with the nearby colleges or for other uses has also been brought up. So there's possibilities here. I wish you luck trying to figure this out, but I do think there's a big argument here legally between the mindset of a profit venture versus a historical property, and I hope you can sort that out legally and that doesn't become a big legal fight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. Edward Powers. I live at 6 McKinley Street in Bronxville. And actually, I would like to address 3 issues. Number 1 has to do with the demolition costs. Number 2, the restoration. And number 3 is the proposed new structure. It was mentioned that Mr. Holcomb obtained 4 properties and one of them is on Hobart, which he sold and made a nice profit, which is he should. The other property is on the corner of Hobart and 22, the so-called Fulling House. The third property was at the top of Winter Hill Road, which I believe was 225, which is called, quote-unquote, the Dutch Schultz House, and of course the fourth one is the Ward House. A different hearing, a different venue, and I know the attorney was at that hearing in Bronxville, and as far as the demolition was concerned, it's mentioned here that the demolition is very expensive. And Mr. Holcomb, and this is on tape, got up and explained how expeditious the demolition can be. And he was referring specifically to the Dutch Schultz House. And he explained how it's done very fast, okay? They take it, he went through the process of the materials were put in the basement, they're compressed, okay? They're taken away, and that was it. I saw the demolition, and I took pictures of it, and it was done very fast. I think the only thing they saved are the pillars that were in front of the house. So that's a question in my mind in terms of how is the demolition of the Ward House different from the Dutch Schultz House in terms of prices. Second thing has to do with restoration, and it was mentioned that the floors are sloping in the house, okay? Unfortunately, I had a fire in a building that I owned and still own in Bronxville. That's about 25 years ago. There may be some people old enough here to remember that fire, but I had water poured in. It's a townhouse on Willow Circle. The top floor was, the roof was gone, the floors were sloping. So I was personally involved with the restoration of the floors in that house. And it wasn't that expensive. It can be done. It was done according to code. And I did bring in some structural steel to shore up the floors. And I still own it, and it's a rental property today. Last item has to do with the proposed new structure. And I don't know if the buildings that are being put up at 225, which was the old Dutch Schultz property, I don't know if they're a template for the proposed structure that would replace the Ward House. But modern is not always better. And I happen to own the house at 6 McKinley Street. Prior owner is here. The craftsmanship and the items that were put in that house are remarkable, okay? And what's put up across the street is quote-unquote modern, but it no way matched what was there as the Dutch Schultz house. And last comment is I think Mr. Lefkowitz may have been in error with his centuries, as I believe the fire, I think, was in the 18th century, not in the 19th century. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please. Right.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson and members of the committee. Happy New Year to all. Happy New Year. My name is Maria Grillo. I reside at 9 Shady Lane in Scarsdale, New York, 10583. And I just wanted to bring a couple of questions up as I'm listening to everyone. Everyone's made very salient points. I would say one of the first things that came to mind was, and I'm just going to touch on these two because I have maybe a third point that's a little more involved. The question between preservation and restoration. And two of the speakers here from Tuckahoe had touched on that. Preservation means to preserve, to keep it intact. Restoration is something that I think would be a really salient point for a potential buyer, because a lot of people actively seek out on purpose historic properties for whatever reason. Maybe they like a good Challenger project, or they're history nerds, or whatever it may be. But I've seen a number of projects like that. Just to relate to a little bit of my own experience, I'm a teacher by trade, but in a former life, I was also a licensed New York salesperson for real estate, and I've worked around people in real estate for a while. So one of my other bigger questions comes to pre-qualification, and that kind of comes to a little bit of my own background. I had bought an apartment in Brooklyn and resided there for about 11 years. And the time came for us, to finally move out and come back here. So we found a realtor. It was listed as a multiple listing. And one of the most remarkable things I noticed about our particular realtor was that she pre-qualified everyone. She checked to see how much percentage is a potential buyer willing to put down, and are they qualified to make that offer? Are they banked financially by a bank or institution? She was able to line up a couple of potential people, and we selected the best, most qualified one. And because of her efforts, tremendously, we got the record sale price for that particular apartment in the building at the time. This was about 6 or 7 years ago in Brooklyn. And so from that, we knew that we were also pre-qualified to buy our current home, which we've been residing at for about 6 or 7 years here. And I knew that if we were going to make a serious offer, we had to have backing. So again, we pre-qualified with our lending institution and put down 30%. And I knew that I could make an offer and it was backed solidly. And of course, the sale went right through and it was fine. So one of my questions is, have potential buyers offered any pre-qualifications to explain that they're backed by a bank or a financial institution? And if they are, how much percentage can they afford to put down? At the time that we bought and sold our apartment and our home, most qualified or pre-qualified potential buyers were 20% down. We put down an offer of 30, and we, showed them that we are very serious about this, and it was accepted right away. So that's one of my big questions right there, pre-qualified, pre-certified potential buyers. One of the other points that I've been thinking about also is from the beginning of the meeting, I'm not quite sure and clear as to the intent of what are we going to do with the property? Is it actually going to be sold for profit, or is there something else? So I'm still a little bit hazy on that. And again, just to reiterate what the other real estate person had mentioned, historic properties often have that appeal because they are historic properties. There are a lot of great things about them. Not only the story that they have as it evolves over time, but also, too, quality and craftsmanship. You cannot find this kind of work anymore. However, you can find people that are niche and specialized, and they can do it. So it would be great, to work together with the efforts of the team here, but also the local community. What kind of experts are locally sourced that can make a significant contribution? I mean, think about it. If future generations that can say, my grandfather worked on this, this is what he did, or my dad worked on this, or, I was learning to be a carpenter, I worked side by side with this person and gained experience in my, future trade. So I think these are some points that maybe we want to bring into the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ideas related to helping us think this through, as well as providing potential solutions, are absolutely welcomed and appreciated.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Leckie. I live in Columbia County, and but I did grow up and live at 6 McKinley Street for many years before selling the house to Dr. Powers. So obviously, I grew up hearing stories about the Ward House, and it's always meant a lot to me to be able to come back here to get involved in helping to save it. But my question, which has been addressed a number of times tonight, is about hardship. How do we define a hardship? Is it based on, it's based on money, but is it, if somebody buys a property and they feel they're not getting the full use of it, do they have to, there's no guarantee, of course, but is it a hardship if they can't make more money than they paid for it? Or is there a certain percentage more? That's not defined, but I think that that's what it really comes down to. And it's been mentioned a number of times, but what's the definition? So, thank you.
Thank you.
this is our former Tuckahoe historian. I just want to make sure everyone knew that.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Judge, I think she asked a question that was probably directed at you, or you could answer, being a judge.
Hi, I'm Marion Schaefer. I live at 28 Grove Lane, and I'm a senior at Bronxville High School. So I just wanted to say that I'm just a high school student, but I've read the historical preservation law, and to me, Section 9 of the law is very clear. It doesn't say, as Mr. Leckwitz indicated, that the commission should weigh if, on balance, the applicant has met the criteria. It actually says, in order to prove the existence of economic hardship, the applicant shall document each of the following. And then it goes on to identify 8 items. The board has to look at the submissions by the applicant to determine that each one has been met. And I think, to me, it seems very clear that just by showing these 8 things, the law tells us that it's a hardship. And it's as simple as that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Peter McGovern from Wilton, Connecticut. I may just establish my credentials. I have an MBA in finance. I've been a commercial banker for over 40 years with the old Bankers Trust Company, with Citibank for a number of years. I'm still actively employed in Manhattan in commercial lending, so I know intimately well how projects are evaluated and how financial analysis occurs. If I have a core competency, it's in evaluating financial projects and determining the valuability. The question, I'll just be redundant, that has come up is, I'm looking at Section 9. The term economic hardship. It's not specifically defined, it's not capitalized. As a layman, I would interpret that as the owner of the property, because of the constraints that the historic preservation designation puts on the property, he will suffer a loss of his capital that he's invested in the property. I think it's a strictly dollars and cents, that's how I look at things, a dollars and cents evaluation of the project. What was the capital invested? And does this designation put that capital at risk of a loss because of the burden of having this designation? You know, there are 8 criteria that are 8 individual criterion that's mentioned here. I assume that's all to establish the parameters of the hardship, and there's been ample documentation provided on both sides of those individual criterion, but I think it really establishes the parameter. To me, the bottom line is the owner subject to a loss in this transaction? It's not a measurement of how much of a loss of his opportunity cost, which I mentioned before. With the project, if he had originally thought he had the potential to make, say, $500,000 by fully developing this project, but now he can only make $300,000 because of the constraints, that is a loss in opportunity. It's not an actual economic loss. It's not a true cash loss. So I would just defer to the board as to how this is interpreted, how it's evaluated. I do not see, from what I have heard, and I've been here for 3 successive meetings on this, I've not seen any representative of the buyer say exactly what cash was invested in this property. We know from the buyer's own statement that he made a bundled purchase and arbitrarily allocated to each of the 4 properties. There was one closing. There's not 4 separate closing with a $651,000 check presented at each closing for that property. It was a bundled purchase. Concordia was in distress and was selling off these properties in a distressed sale. And opportunistically, Mr. Holcomb came along and purchased the property as a bundle without even evaluating it. It was a real estate play, and very, very common, and that's the way our system works. The economic evaluation that went into this analysis, I will only speculate, but I've seen it hundreds of times, is here's my investment in the project, not in 4 separate addresses. Here's the project, and what's my return by developing out these properties? What's going to be my return on this project? And that's the assessment that's made. Maybe one of the 2 of the properties maybe end up being break even, but the other 2 properties as a whole make the entire project worthwhile. So it's not, this is unique in that the owner of this property has not been residing at this property for 50 years. We're in a business there. This is you have to look at who the buyer is, when he came in, and the circumstances around that. And you can actually today, because it's only two years old, 2 years ago he made the investment, you can actually look at the dollars and cents. Ask for the closing statement. Let's see the dollars that were put into this. What's your carrying cost? And will this designation, based on these other criteria, put you at a loss? Will you walk away? Will you incur a hard dollar loss? Is your capital at risk? And that's the point I just want to make. I've heard a lot of smoke today about development and new roofs and floors. I think that's irrelevant. You're looking at what is the actual hard dollar risk the owner has by living with the constraints of this of the preservation designation. So that's really all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are doing our very best to gather as much information as we can to answer these very questions, and all of this is very helpful.
Good evening. I'm Elaine Provenzano, 11 River Street, Tuckahoe, New York, with the Friends of the Ward House. I'm also on the Tuckahoe History Committee. I'm children's librarian, so I don't like to hear anything thrown like I'm in a fringe group. I'm in a very caring group, historically minded. The Concordia College did not demolish the Ward House. There were students living there 2 years ago. And I'm sure the building department of the Tuckahoe Building Department made sure that it was safe for them to reside there. We do know that the Ward House needs to be preserved and restored. Restoring is not a new construction. When you say you're going to make a restoration by building a new house, that's not a restoration. That's a new house. A replica maybe, but not the same. And what we need to remember to honor this history, and I feel honored to be a part of this. We all have busy lives. We all are involved in a lot of things. It takes a lot of work to commit to this. But we're honored because this history is important and unique to our community. Before any of us were here, before the famine Irish came here and had their first mass at the Ward House, before my grandparents came here from Czechoslovakia and worked in Hodgman's Rubber, and my other grandfather came from Italy and worked in the quarry where the marble was first discovered in the Ward House. That history was there. Most importantly, this wasn't a place that Washington slept at. It was a place where blood was shed for our freedom. A very unique history to have in our community. And to gloss over it and just say, oh, we'll just tear it down and put up a replica and we'll throw a sign up there. It doesn't honor that history because that's sacred ground. And I think as a community, we've tried to remember that. We want to work with people to make sure that that happens. And we also know that for restoration and preservation, there is a lot of funding out there to help that. So we heard a lot of money numbers mentioned for the restoration and preservation, but there is a lot of funding that would help with those if the owner, whoever owns it, would choose to do so. So I certainly hope that as a community, we can keep the Ward House intact, keep this landmark intact, and preserve it and honor its history for the people like Captain Samuel Crawford and those others that lost their lives there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So a lot of helpful information shared tonight. Some documents that were received just within the last day or so. I think that we have the opportunity to take this all under consideration. This public meeting has been open for quite a number of months now. We have before us an opportunity to look at how we move forward with this. I know I would like some time to review this documentation, think about everything that was said tonight. We will be having a meeting in February, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, I think we have to set that as part of the next agenda item. We have an opportunity, if we choose to take all this information that's been shared at all of these meetings and use it to render a decision in an upcoming meeting. We could close this meeting, the public meeting on the Ward House, without a vote tonight, but with the idea that if anything were to come up, additional answers to some of the questions we raised, or anything new, a window would be fair to submit new information. I think that's standard procedure, if we want it to be, and I think we would want that to be the case. Do I sound like I'm heading down a path that makes some sense for where we are, what we have, what we need to do?
Yes, I think we received a lot of information today. Some of the things that we talked about, I know are in that documentation. I want to review everything that we received, and I think that would be the direction that I would want to go in.
So if we close the public meeting, I think we have 62 days.
You would have 62 days.
We have 62 days.
The board just received a lot of information. There might be a follow-up question there, or, I think the applicant may want to follow up some of the questions that you asked tonight.
Yep.
So maybe just an open period of, say, 2 weeks for submissions might be acceptable to the board. Close the public hearing tonight, but leave that part open for submissions for 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, it's done, and then you could render your decision within that 62 days would be technically tonight.
Okay. If we were to do that, it would involve a vote with us tonight to close the public meeting.
That's it.
Okay. How's that sound?
So moved, if that's what you're asking.
Ah, okay. I think that was that a call for a motion? Is it so moved? The motion to close. It's moving on down to close the public meeting on the Certificate of Hardship application for 230 White Plains Road.
Second.
Just a caveat, you may want to put that 2 week
Yep.
in there for submissions.
Okay, so
moved.
this is the move to close the public hearing to consider the Certificate of Hardship application for 230 White Plains Road with 2 weeks from now being the end of the comment and information submission period.
And that would be for the public also. So
Cool.
the public has heard anything tonight that they want to comment on and submit it in writing.
They can send it to John.
Yeah.
2 weeks.
So that'll be Thursday, January 18th.
Okay, sorry. So we have a movement and we had a second. Or do we need to second it again? We're good. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. The public meeting is closed for 230 White Plains Road. Anything and everything by 2 weeks, please. A vote will occur within 62 days from now. So thank you again to everyone who has provided helpful information. It's really appreciated. It's really cool that Tuckahoe has a community that is involved and cares, and that's why we're here to do what we do. So we have another agenda item that we should move on to. We're good?
Yeah.
On we go. So the discussion is acknowledgement of a local landmark nomination for One Generoso Pope Place and the settlement of a public hearing to consider nomination. So every Tuckahoe local landmark that has been approved thus far has started in the same way. A nomination must be submitted to the Tuckahoe Building Department. Today, a completed nomination for One Generoso Pope Place, the Generoso Pope Building, a nomination was submitted and received by the Tuckahoe Building Department, which then triggers the next step of the process, which this board acknowledges that the building department has received that and that we now have the opportunity to consider that nomination to make that building at One Generoso Pope Place a Tuckahoe landmark. We can vote to set a meeting, or do we set the meeting and then vote to open it? Can we say that it'll be the February meeting? Yeah. Okay.
We
Okay.
need everyone else on the email chain. Figure out the date.
Okay, so let's do that. If I could ask for a motion to set the opening of a public meeting for the nomination to landmark One Generoso Pope Place at our February meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye? Okay, good. That's all of us. Okay, so that is therefore official. So at our February meeting, we will begin a public meeting to discuss the potential local landmarking of One Generoso Pope Plaza, the original Tuckahoe Village Hall.
Just a small clarification, it's the recommendation to the village board for the landmark.
Yes, thank you.
They're the ones that landmark.
Thank you. Yes, we will consider the nomination in order to determine if we recommend to the village. We're good with the vote, though? With that, okay. That's what I meant. That's what I meant. Okay, so that will start at the next meeting in February. Exciting year to come. Exciting year to come. Okay, so then we move into miscellaneous business. Does anyone on the commission have anything?
I don't.
Nope.
No. So I know that a number of people tonight have mentioned, the work that we're committed to and that is taking place as being for future generations. It's for us, it's for our kids, but it's for future generations. But these future generations, what have they ever done for us? Okay, I'm channeling a little Groucho Marx there, who also said I would never want to belong to any club that would have me as a member. No offense, guys. No offense. No offense.
Yes, the other day I shot an elephant in my pajamas. What he was doing in my pajamas, I don't know.
Totally spontaneous there with that one.
Well, also Groucho.
Yes, also Groucho.
Why a duck?
Anyone else?
I'm not that talented.
Are these all going in the minutes? Say no.
So our meeting needs to be, the actual date needs to be determined, but as soon as we have that, we will let everyone know. We will post it. And
Great.
yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you again to everyone. And do I have a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you again. Happy New Year.